Welcome to The Explainer. So have you ever felt like you're playing detective, trying to solve the mystery of a highly intelligent kid who just has these incredibly confusing, intense sensory behaviors? Like, one minute they're effortlessly solving this massive, complex puzzle, and literally the next, they're completely overwhelmed by the hum of the refrigerator. Or they're acting like the seam of a sock is an absolute instrument of torture. It's a total paradox, right? Leaves parents and educators scratching their heads. Well, today we're putting on our detective hats. We're going to uncover exactly why this happens and, more importantly, how to accurately identify what's actually going on beneath the surface.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for untangling these complex profiles today. We'll start with the sensory overlap confusion, then define sensual overexcitability, separate that from ADHD, compare it with autism traits, uncover the twice exceptional reality, and finally, look at practical support and resources.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the sensory overlap confusion. We're looking at the shared symptoms that so often lead to misdiagnosis.
Look, if you've ever felt completely lost by the conflicting behaviors you're seeing in a gifted child, I really want to validate that right now. It is genuinely confusing. We have to look at these shared overlapping symptoms as the main clues in our mystery. We're talking about intense reactions to textures and sounds, picky eating, daily battles over clothing, frequent sensory meltdowns, getting easily distracted in busy places, or just sudden, total emotional shutdowns. Now, if a kid is melting down every single morning over a scratchy shirt tag, or they just shut down completely in a brightly lit grocery store, it's so easy to jump straight to a clinical label, right? These behavioral clues are exactly why gifted children are misdiagnosed so often. They look almost identical to several different neurodevelopmental conditions, but the root cause? It might be something entirely different.
Which brings us to Section 2, and our prime suspect in this whole investigation, defining sensual overexcitability.
So, going off of Casimir Dabrowski's framework, sensual overexcitability, or OE for short, is this inborn, heightened responsiveness to all sensory input: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, the whole shebang, and it's paired with this massive capacity for enhanced aesthetic appreciation. This is not just being a little sensitive. No way. This is a profound, inherent intensity that makes a child experience the world so much more vividly than average. It's like experiencing the world with the volume, the brightness, and the texture dials turned all the way up to 11. Their nervous system is just wired to take in more, feel more, and process more. And here's the kicker. This heightened wiring directly contributes to their immense developmental and creative potential.
Now, what's fascinating about this is the profound duality of OE. It's totally a double-edged sword. On one side, you've got this intense, aversive discomfort. The absolute skin-crawling agony of a scratchy tag, or rigid, picky eating because of a food's texture, or severe meltdowns triggered by the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. But flip the coin, and on the exact same side, you have unparalleled heightened pleasure. A kid with sensual OE might literally be moved to tears by a beautiful piece of music. They might find deep, restorative calm in the texture of a specific fabric, or show an early, intense love for visual arts and nature. It's an incredible superpower of deep aesthetic joy, but it's inherently tied to a vulnerability to sensory overload.
So, let's move into Section 3, separating OE from ADHD. We need to distinguish between executive dysfunction and sensory overload.
Let's put sensual OE into a diagnostic lineup right next to ADHD and see the real differences. This comparison brilliantly illustrates the core split. See, ADHD is a pervasive executive functioning issue. It affects the child consistently across almost all contexts because it's driven by differences in dopamine and attention regulation. But sensual OE, that is highly situational and purposeful. A kid with OE is driven by a search for aesthetic delight, or maybe just a need for physical comfort, and they are entirely capable of intense hyperfocus, as long as the task is sensory-rich and intellectually engaging. So the distractibility you see in OE is tied directly to overwhelming sensory input in that exact moment. ADHD distractibility, on the other hand, is tied to broader, ongoing struggles with sustaining attention and controlling impulses.
I want you to actively think about this question for a second, whether it's about your own kid or a student in your class. Do they focus well and thrive when their sensory needs are met and they are intellectually challenged? Like, if you give them a quiet space, soft clothes, and a super complex puzzle, do they suddenly just dial in and concentrate for hours? Because if the answer is yes, you're almost certainly looking at sensual OEE, not the pervasive executive dysfunction you'd see with ADHD.
Moving right along to Section 4, OD versus autism traits. Let's differentiate these neurodevelopmental profiles.
Just look at this statistic. 40%. Over 40% of gifted children show notable sensory sensitivities. That's a huge chunk of the gifted population. And this overlap perfectly explains why an autism misdiagnosis happens all the time with these kids. When clinicians or teachers rely purely on behavioral checklists without looking at the broader gifted context or how giftedness kind of alters how things present, well, that 40% can so easily be misread as being on the autism spectrum.
The absolute crucial thing here is understanding the underlying drivers. Yes, both profiles share significant sensory overwhelm and intense focus, but pure sensual OE is intricately tied to profound empathy, an incredibly rich imagination, really nuanced language skills, and asynchronous development. And again, the intense reactions are situational. Autism, conversely, involves a broader neurodevelopmental profile. It's characterized by distinct social and communication differences. We're talking challenges with social reciprocity, a tendency toward literal thinking, and a very strict need for routine and sameness that actually serves a deeply regulatory function for the child. So, during a meltdown, they might look similar, but the internal architecture driving that meltdown, vastly different.
But wait, what if it's not just an either-or scenario? Welcome to Section 5, the twice exceptional reality. This is our big developmental plot twist.
Twice exceptional, or 2E, refers to kids who are gifted but also have a co-occurring learning disability or neurodevelopmental disorder like ADHD or autism. And the reality of 2E is incredibly complex. See, giftedness can completely mask a disorder, and a disorder can completely mask giftedness. High intelligence allows a child to compensate so incredibly well, using just sheer cognitive willpower, that their ADHD or autism traits might fly completely under the radar for years. Or flip it around. Their sensory meltdowns or executive struggles might be so disruptive in class that literally nobody notices they're profoundly gifted. This complex masking is exactly why you can't just use simple observational checklists. You absolutely need a comprehensive evaluation by a highly experienced professional to untangle these threads.
Finally, we reach Section 6, Practical Support and Resources. Let's take all this from theory right into practice.
Honestly, it all starts with one simple but deeply profound phrase. I heavily advocate for a validation-first approach. When a kid is having a meltdown over a sound or a texture, your very first step as an adult is just to acknowledge their intense sensory reality. Don't immediately pathologize it, and don't try to fix it right away. Just saying, I see how strongly that affects you, diffuses their shame, it lowers their defensive walls, and it builds immediate trust. You're reframing their experience from being a difficult child to having an amazingly sensitive and responsive nervous system. Once they're validated, we bring in the environmental toolkits. This means providing noise-canceling headphones and soft, seam-free clothing, and making that standard operating procedure not some special reward they have to earn. It means creating sensory toolkits, maybe using things like the container method for overwhelming input. Dimming fluorescent lights and letting them use quiet fidget items can literally transform a child's ability to focus and learn. Plus, we've got to leverage their aesthetic strengths by actively bringing art, music, and nature into their daily routines. And the best part? These interventions do not have to break the bank. Using low-cost fabric adaptations or simply letting a kid read under a tree outside works wonders. This is especially awesome for diverse or resource-limited environments, like many South African classrooms where expensive sensory gear just isn't an option.
Speaking of exceptional support, I really want to enthusiastically point you towards an incredible organization, Gifted Children South Africa. The foundational info and the compassionate framework we used in this explainer draws heavily from their vital work. They are just a phenomenal hub of ongoing support, advocacy, and education. Not only do they offer brilliant insights, but you can actually stream their dedicated Spotify podcast series for much deeper dives into all of this stuff. Plus, you can connect with their active community on social media to share experiences and find strategies that have actually been tested by real people. Links to all their social platforms are super easy to find. So if you're a parent trying to figure this out, a teacher wanting to support your students, or just an advocate for neurodivergent kids, you really need to head over to their site. I highly encourage you to visit giftedchildrensouthafrica.org right now. You can download a ton of free resources directly from their website. It is an absolute treasure trove and such an invaluable toolkit to help you start accurately identifying and actively supporting the gifted kids in your life today.
All right, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. When we look at these intense, vibrant,
And yeah, sometimes overwhelming behaviors in our kids. Are we rushing to treat a deficit, or are we simply misunderstanding a developmental superpower? Reframing how we view intensity changes absolutely everything for these children. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep asking the right questions and definitely keep nurturing those brilliant minds.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.